Begin again? Court reporter, are you ready to begin? Okay. All right. We'll dispense with the formalities of all rise.
This meeting is being recorded.
All right. We'll go on the record now. All right. And we'll start from scratch. Good morning. We're convened for oral arguments for IPR 2025-00222. I'm Judge Drosh, and joining me virtually are Judge Daniels and Judge Laney. There is a panel change order that is being issued as we speak by the Chief Judge or the Vice Chief Judge that is swapping myself, Judge Drosh, in place of Judge Myers. So again, the panel is Judge Drosh, Judge Daniels, and Judge Laney. All right. After this hearing, we will hear the second hearing, which will be IPR 2025-00221. Hopefully, we will have whatever technical difficulties ironed out by that time. So we'll start again with appearances for both parties for those who will be arguing today. If anyone else is attending in person or remotely but will not be speaking, please identify them as well. For example, in-house counsel or other corporate representatives. Counsel for petitioner, will you please present your appearances?
Certainly. David O'Brien for Tesla. With me is lead counsel John Bowser and other counsel.
Thank you.
Can we turn on the microphone because it's hard to hear?
This is Jonathan Bowser, lead counsel. Also in attendance is Mr. Ashraf Fazi of Tesla, okay, and Mr. Paul Margulies of Tesla.
Okay. All right. Counsel for patent owner?
For patent owner, Brandon Thies, and also Dan Golub, who will be making his way here virtually for the second hearing, and we're being assisted by Ms. Heather King.
Okay. And there are no other panels counsel with you?
That's
okay.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. All right. Following the hearing, please make sure the court reporter has accurate spellings of your names, as well as any other additional information to ensure the accuracy of terms, references, or case citations that will be discussed today. All right. Per the order regarding the oral hearing, petitioner is allotted 60 minutes for his presentation. Petitioner will go first. And petitioner may reserve some time for rebuttal, but that may not exceed half the total argument time. Following petitioner's presentation, patent owner also will have 60 minutes to make his presentation and may reserve some time for rebuttal arguments that should not exceed half the total argument time. A couple of more quick reminders before we begin. To aid in the preparation of the hearing transcript, and so the judges appearing virtually can follow your presentation. Please identify your demonstrative slides by the slide numbers. And remember that your arguments should be limited only to those arguments presented in your briefs. And at all times, please make sure it's clear which challenges and claims you are addressing at all times. And if you have any objections to opposing counsel's arguments, please hold your objections until it is your turn at the podium. Counsel for petitioner, would you like to reserve some of your time for rebuttal?
I would, Your Honor. Let's reserve 30 minutes.
Counsel for patent owner, would you like to reserve some of your time?
Yes, Your Honor. 15 minutes, please.
Okay. All right. Counsel for petitioner, you may begin your presentation when you're ready.
Is this mic working?
If there's a green light on, it should be working.
Good. Okay. Are you picking up my voice now?
Yes.
Thank you. May it please the board. We introduced, so I'm going to get right into it. I'm going to start at slide 2. I'm going to be referring to the physical slides, no presentation slides, but I'll be identifying those as we go through. So the claims, terms, and grounds in issue here are summarized really on the first 4 slides in your deck. The term integration time appears in claims 1, 9, and 15, while an express recitation of different integration times, one different from the other, appears in claims 11 and 16. During a frame, that phrase appears only in claim 2. Sensors, optics components, channels, and combining limitations are all undisputed in this proceeding. Control and integration time of each sensor, we'll call that that's part of limitation 1.3, is really the principal dispute here, and that will be my initial focus today. Let's skip forward to slide 5. So we have 2 obviousness grounds, Mitsushima and U in view of Miyazaki. As I previewed, our principal dispute involves limitation 1.3. With the exception of claim 2, all of the disputed issues center on control and integration time of each sensor language in 1.3. I'm going to begin with how grounds 1 and 2 each render obvious limitation 1.3. I'm now on slide 6. I'm also going to initially focus on integration time and on a pair of requirements that IV seeks to smuggle into limitation 1.3. Our record demonstrates that IV's purported requirements are extraneous. But the record also shows, or also demonstrates, that IV's purported requirements are met by both grounds. So to preview, those IV requirements include independent control and different integration times. I'm now at slide 7, focusing on integration time. Integration time presents in the context of the larger limitation, again, a processing component configured to control an integration time of each sensor. So what does integration time mean? Turning to slide 8, we construe integration time according to the
Counsel,
Yes, Your Honor.
real quick, just because I want to have context and better understanding.
Certainly.
And I understand you're saying that the patent owner is trying to smuggle in the limitation. And before we get in, I just want to have a little bit more context to understand why it matters. And more specifically, what would change? I mean, how does their construction affect your contentions? And the reason I ask is, well, first, let me start with there. I mean, how do you think that it impacts? What about their construction undermines your contentions, even if we were to accept their construction?
So that's why I led with, we oppose, but it doesn't matter. Each of our grounds fully contains disclosure of the erroneous or extraneous requirements that IV would impose on the references. I'll differ with you maybe ever so slightly. It's not clear to me that they've offered any specific construction of any specific term in the claims to include those, but their intent to require those extraneous requirements of the prior art grounds, I think is
Okay.
Is that
but you, real quick, your answer gives me a little bit of pause. Then, if that's true, then why are we engaging in a claim construction? So I just want to crystallize it. I understand your position is, hey, heads we win, tails we win, because our evidence satisfies it with whatever they say, right? So help me understand, and I don't need, at this point, I'm not asking you to get into the specifics, just help me understand their construction and just a broad overview, but we have that, and how you think a different construction applies, and how we have that, just broadly, and then you can, I'll stop and we can go into your construction argument.
Certainly, let me sort of clarify, make sure that we're not passing ships in the night here. Which term are you asking about construction of?
Integration time.
Okay, so integration time, we are proposing a construction, and we show that on the slide. Yes, the other side does advance its own construction. We don't know what the additional words mean. They haven't articulated what role they play in the case, and we don't believe they play a role in the case, but we do know that the term integration time is explicitly defined in the specification, and we do know that it was construed by the GM Corps. So that's
Right,
what
we're fighting, this is a construction over a construction. I get it. I just want you to crystallize for me before we get into deciding the construction of the construction, where the dispute is and why it matters.
The honest answer, Your Honor, is I don't know. I don't know what they mean by those terms. They haven't articulated what it means. They haven't articulated
No,
what.
no. I'm not interested in what they mean. I know you can't predict, but your understanding of what the dispute is and how it impacts your case. In other words, you're obviously fighting what they're saying, regardless of not understanding what they mean. When you understand them to be saying, you lose if I'm right. I want you to crystallize for me why, what you're fighting about, what you think they think you lose, or what, I mean, because your briefs certainly don't just simply throw the hands up and say, well, I don't know how this impacts anything. I'm just going to bear along and say what I say. You fight back and forth. I just want you to crystallize, okay, they're saying this is for example, seen. They're saying seen is, let's take the institution decision. The institution stage, they said it covers seeing, not a still and an image. And we obviously at institution stage didn't buy that. And now it appears they're shifting it a little bit and they're saying, well, don't focus on image or still, focus more on the fact that it has to be a duration of time. That's how I understand things have shifted a little bit. Is that a fair understanding, at least at that point?
Partially, yes. And from my perspective, Your Honor, partially, maybe not. Certainly the argument on seen, I think they have dropped. You'll have to ask them if they've dropped it, but that's my impression from the briefing. In terms of, duration is more a concept that comes up we've offered a construction of during a frame. That's a temporal aspect of limitation. That actually is not in play in integration time here.
But I thought that's, and that's why I want to crystallize the dispute before I hear your argument, so I know how it applies. So I understand their point about seeing and going back to the term integration time is that this is supposed to be, as the name suggests, integration, right? You're supposed to be integrating over a period of time this information. And so what they're saying is, as I understand it generally, and obviously they'll correct me, but I want to make sure you and I are on the same page. What I understand the dispute to be is it can't just be an instant. It's got to be an integration of information that occurs over some time.
To the extent that the act of integration time is required, and I would not say that it is required in Claim 1, but in terms of definitionally for integration time, yeah, we do not have a dispute whether integration time is an instant or a period of time. That is not dispositive in this case.
What is the dispute? Crystallize the dispute for me. What is the dispute as you understand it between you and patent owner?
From our perspective, the dispute centers around whether the prior art grounds teach 1.3, and it sort of starts and stops there. And I think we established that very clearly on the record. It's not clear to us that there is any meaningful dispute insofar as construction is concerned on limitation 1.3.
And you say that because you're taking what both of you are suggesting that you're taking what the court construed integration time to mean, i.e. the time the image sensor collects and integrates signal from the scene.
That is exactly what we are understanding the term to mean.
Okay, so it's not really so much a claim construction issue, it's an application of the facts issue.
That's how we see the case, Your Honor.
Okay, I will stop and let you go for a while.
All right. Well, no problem. I'm glad
Before you do that, sorry, counsel, let me just follow up with one quick question. So it seems to me that, that is it fair in this case, from your perspective, to say that these two claim constructions that I'm looking at on slide 8 are essentially can be distinguished, but there's no real difference between them?
I have not discerned a difference, and I don't believe the other side has explained a difference, Your Honor. So
Thank
yes.
Now, just to put a finer point on that, and the reason there's no difference is because the court's construction says the time the image sensor collects and integrates signal from the scene. Patent owner's proposed construction, the time interval during which the image sensor collects and integrates signal from the scene. When it says the time and the time interval during which, I mean, by saying the time, you're indicating that time is an interval. Is that fair?
Our time is at least an extent, yes.
Yeah, we're not nothing happens, especially electronics, when you're letting charge, like when you're using sensors, it's got to accumulate. And so that's not a nano instant of time. There is obviously some interval, regardless of how big or small it is.
That would be consistent with our understanding of the case as well, Your Honor.
Okay, good. All right, so start from 8, slide 8 then.
No problem. So consistent with that focus on the facts of the case or the application of the art to the claims, I'm going to skip ahead to slide 17, focusing on Matsushima. So it's undisputed in this record that Matsushima addresses, or discloses rather, 2 independent imaging systems, distinct optics components, distinct sensors, and a processing component. I've laid out some of the relevant pictures and disclosure here. We're going to discuss those as we get further in the case. I'm going to go to slide 19 at this point, and you see a picture again. It's undisputed that Matsushima describes a processing component configured to control integration times of sensors using an electronic shutter per sensor. It's also undisputed that each distinct sensor has a shutter drain and shutter gate and an electronic shutter function. I'm now branching to the right-hand side of the slide that controls the accumulation time of the charge accumulated by each sensor via shutter gate pulses. Control of charge accumulation time is control of integration time, as charge is the signal from the scene in a CCD image sensor. Each sensor has its own CCD drive circuit, if you'll notice. Those are circuits 20A for sensor 18A and 20B for sensor 18B. And notably, in terms of a patent owner admission, patent owner does not dispute that Matsushima describes electronic shutter hardware elements at each CD. I'm now flipping to slide 20. Here we have the, extreme correspondence or striking correspondence between the words of the limitation 1.3 and the disclosure of the reference. And I'm going to speak from the perspective of Matsushima. You'll see the mapping to the language of the claim. Matsushima.
In doing that real quick, when you talk about the control,
yes.
Can you highlight for me or explain to me your understanding of how that control occurs? And in particular, what I'd like to know is your understanding of whether or not each of the sensors or the shutter function, the CPU, does the CPU has to send a separate signal to control each of the shutters? Or does the CPU send one signal? Does one signal go to all? You understand my question?
I think I see where you're going. There are 2, let me move forward to slide 22. We're going to be talking to a diagram, and this is a pretty good presentation of the diagram. You'll see the processing component is highlighted for you, at least a portion of the processing component is highlighted in purple. That's all processing. You'll notice that, as I said, that the CCD control circuits are specific to, distinct to, independent legs of the control loop here. The control loop involves the charge that's accumulated on the sensor. It's sampled through the CDS circuit. It's converted from analog to digital. And in 60A, the integration circuit integrates that up here in Matsushima to an illumination level. There's a specific term in the case, and subject luminance is the term that Matsushima uses. That is fed through the CPU and back to the independent control circuit for the sensor to control its integration time. You'll see there's two.
And what's the independent control circuit, which you're saying the whole thing? So I'm with you that the sensors and all the hardware part is separate and independent. And as I understand, one of the things we have to get down into that I need your help with is understanding, because let me start off. You agree with patent owner's representation, and I believe your representation, that you accept the ruling that we previously made, and you're not fighting the ruling that we previously made. I understand you and patent owner have a different understanding of it, but the starting point is our previous ruling in the previous IPR institution decision, correct?
Absolutely, Your Honor. Our understanding.
Okay.
Yes.
So we have an independent control of each sensor, of the plurality of sensors.
Just to be clear, our understanding of your
yes.
that you established a one-to-one correspondence between sensors and optics components. You construed in that regard limitation 1.2 of the claim and determined that Toyota's approach to the claim, which involved a combined optics component, did not meet that limitation. That's what we understand.
Right. I understand those facts in the previous IPR are completely different than this facts, which is evidenced by the fact that nobody's fighting over whether or not we have separate independent plurality of sensors and stuff, right?
Correct.
The issues,
Correct.
That was more of a hardware question. This one is directed a little bit more towards the processing, the operation part.
I think that's
fair?
I think that's, yes, Your Honor.
Okay. And so here we have in this case, the principle, and as you represent, the only claim element in claim 1 that's at issue is a processing component configured to control an integration time of each sensor, right?
Yes.
And the fight between you two appears to be the fact that it says control and integration time of each sensor. Patent owner is focusing really hard on the fact that it has to be independent, separate, and we do make representations that support their position in the earlier IPR, which nobody's fighting over what we said. And obviously, and initially in our institution decision in this matter, I think one of the things we understood at the time, but where we wanted to flush this out for a further trial, is the understanding that you can still have, even if you have separate independent sensors and optic structure, you can still have separate independent control, even if you're sending the same signal to the different sensors. And so in reading the prior art, it seemed as though you had a CPU that had to send a separate control signal to each of the different ones. In other words, it wasn't just one control signal that went to all. Each one of the optic components and sensor structure had to get its own signal in order to control the integration time. Even if the time, the amount of time that it's going to allow it to accumulate energy was the same. Do you understand where I'm coming from at this point?
I think so. I would say that I think the other side is disputing whether there is independence. That's not true. There is no dispute, I think, on this record in terms of independence. I think their only dispute has to do with different integration times. Our record very clearly shows that the references teach that. So even that imagined distinction is not in play.
Well, the claim certainly doesn't say anything about
Agreed.
being different integration times. At least claim one. I understand there's dependent claims that address that, but claim one says nothing about being different integration times, right?
We agree.
So before we get to that point, I think what you just said helps me. Show me the why it is exactly that there's independent control. Setting aside the time, just show me independent control and why you're saying that evidence establishes independent control.
Sure. Let me see if I can help out with that, anchoring from slide 22. So
Yeah.
I think on this record, there is no dispute that Matsushima describes independent imaging systems. We sort of set that as a baseline. There's no dispute that Matsushima describes distinct paths for controlling the integration time of an individual sensor, distinct from the other sensors. And there's also no dispute that Matsushima teaches an electronic shutter on each sensor for controlling the integration time of that individual sensor distinct from the other sensor. In the illustration on the slide, you'll see those components. You'll see the separate and independent CCD drive circuits, one for each channel in terms of it's illustrated to the side. You'll also see the separate and independent integration circuits, whose job is to gather the data to determine the subject luminance for that channel. So each of them is controlled independently. What I have queued up to discuss next is how it is also it is also designed to control them with different values. But as we're discerning here, that's yet a further imported requirement. On the independence, I think we can see it there in the circuit diagram or in the block diagram, and in the independence of those circuits, those two legs which control each of the imaging systems.
What is TG28?
TG is a timing generator. You'll see there's both a coordination between the two and a pipeline phenomenon through the channels. Image is integrated in the sensor. It is sampled in the correlated double sampling circuit. It is then converted from analog, still at this point, to digital, and eventually and integrated as well, but then it also meets up with its counterpart from the other imaging channel to be combined in this circuit. So there's a pipeline that goes through this circuit, and the timing of these circuits needs to be managed. It does not indicate in any way, shape, or form an identity of integration time control.
Okay, so in other words, on 28 TG, that timing circuit or 18A could be affected by a different timing signal than 18B.
Absolutely, Your Honor.
Okay.
And not only we expect that, we'd be happy to talk about how we know that from Matsushima.
No, okay, you can keep going.
Okay. Well, I was going to go and talk about different integration times, so I was going to go to slide 25, and that's sort of that point.
Good.
So the petition explains that Matsushima teaches different integration times for different regions of a scene. The expert explains that a posita would understand that in Matsushima, integration times of the image sensors would have different values. This sort of goes to the point you were asking, for different subject luminances for the different fields of view. So here in Matsushima, each of those sensors covers a different field of view. You'll see on the right-hand side of the slide a presentation of that. The drawings themselves teach different subject luminance for different channels, and here's why. You'll see the one I've highlighted in yellow. That's a wider angle. That's angle alpha, but it's the wider angle field of view. It encompasses the most luminous object in the solar system, the sun. The other one does not. So, proof there in the picture. One has a very, very large subject luminance, a greater subject luminance, and the other one has a smaller one. So then why that plays out, we go ahead and explain to you. I've now turned to slide 26. It's a busy slide, but it brings together all of the components of this. The analysis to the left, the circuit diagram, and then the image frames and the fields of view. Our expert explains to you that I'm on the left side, that in Matsushima, the integration times of the image sensors, they're red in the slide, 18A and 18B. They would have different values for the different subject luminances of their different fields of view. He also explains that this is because the first subject luminance of the wider shooting angle is determined independently from the one for the narrowing one. Those are the two integration circuits, again, separate, 60A and 60B. Finally, in the first image sensor, which images the larger, the wider field of view.
You meant 18A and 18B.
Did I say
not
not yet?
16A.
Yeah, 18A and 18B. Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay.
60A and 60B for the integration. It's 18A and 18B for the sensors. But in the wider one, which encompasses the sun, we would expect not only we expect, we know there's a higher subject luminance. We can see it there in the slide. And for the other one, it's going to be a lower subject luminance, therefore different integration times. So here we've demonstrated that 1.3, we spoke earlier about.
So, real quick,
Yes.
When you go straight from that to therefore, close that gap a little bit more. I understand better yet, let me explain what I'm thinking, and that way you can see how large the gap is, so you can help connect the two.
Absolutely.
I understand what you're saying is in the broader view that includes the sun's bright, so you're going to have a lot more light coming into that focus for that particular sensor. And so your time is going to have to be a little bit smaller. Otherwise, your sensors will get basically, for lack of a better way, overstimulated.
Yeah, oversaturated.
And then in B, you're more focused on the individual that's in the picture and the flower. And so you're not having the focal point isn't so much directed with the sun, so much light. So it's going to be a longer period of time, is what you're saying. It is the very fact that you're focusing on an area that doesn't include the bright sun means you're going to necessarily have a smaller amount of time than if you're focused on an image that includes the sun. Because of the brightness of the sun, it's necessarily going to have to be a shorter period of time.
I wouldn't argue it in terms of necessarily follows, Your Honor. I would argue that's what the reference teaches, and I would also point out that that's what it's easier to, or it's helpful to explain pictures over 1,000 words. So I've done it here in terms of pictures, but textually in the specification, paragraph 23 of Matsushima describes exactly that the integration time is calculated based on the subject luminance. So yes, bright,
And it says the integration time for each sensor.
it does.
See, and because I think that isn't that patent owner's point is it talks more integration time looking at the whole image, not so much on a sensor by sensor image.
They don't have any basis to demonstrate that, Your Honor. I understand that that is their argument. That's not how the circuit is designed, which is why I was illustrating the circuit for you. You wouldn't have a separate integration circuit for each side if you were going to throw one of them away and just use one of them. You wouldn't have separate control circuits to interface with the two sensors if you're going to send the same signal to both sensors.
In which paragraph, could you highlight again for me the paragraph you pointed me to that you said speak directly to this?
So if you go to paragraph 23, says that the respective imaging optics, respective, by the way.
Hold on, just for the record, paragraph 23
23.
Of exhibit 107.
Yeah, and we concentrate on 23, 24, 33, and 34 are pretty focused on that point. But in terms of the control loop from subject illuminance through to integration time, I think the textual description there is pretty clear, and it's described in the context again of each sensor.
Counsel?
Yes, Your Honor.
Just want to let you know that you've gone into the time that you wanted to reserve, but we can proceed as you like.
I'll bleed into it a little bit. Let me, Judge Laney, are there other issues that you would like me to get to? I have a relatively deep deck here, and I'm happy to branch to whatever issues you find the most helpful.
So far, this has been very helpful. How about I do this? I'll keep my mouth shut, give you some time to hit whatever the high points you want to make sure you hit.
Okay. This is your hearing, honestly, not mine. So I will branch forward a little bit. We have two grounds here, and I want to tread a little bit of the same ground, so to speak, with respect to the U reference, just to give you a framework there. I'm jumping ahead to slide 33. So again, and relative to 1.3, U alone, as well as U in combination with Miyazaki render obvious limitation 1.3. I'm now on slide 34. The claim is the same. The same operative limitation, the processing component limitation is in play. The same construction is in play. I would note for your honors that the prior art teachings of U with respect to claim 9 and its dependents are entirely uncontested by the patent owner here. IV seems to represent something different in its slides, but I think the record is very clear on that. Let me jump to 35. U is a similar system, but its thrust is same field of view. So images covering the same field of view, but spectrally varied. So red, green, blue, undifferentiated white. They are captured using multiple image sensors. Each has its own lens, and each of those images are captured simultaneously and then combined. So in a lot of ways, very similar to what we were discussing in Mitsushima. I've now turned to slide 36. It's undisputed that U
Real quick on that, just a quick question on the slide 34, or is that the slide 35?
Yes, Your Honor.
Would this one also, like the previous one, focus on different points within the image? Because it seems like since they're different colors, they would all be focused on the same thing.
You're correct on that, Your Honor. They have the same field of view, but they have different spectral components of the image that they separately capture. And the key point here is that the different spectral components have different intensity, and therefore the control loop for red versus blue versus green versus all colors of the visible spectrum is different, and they are separately and independently controlled, and there is a distinct exposure time and therefore for integration time at foot in U and in U in view of Miyazaki, excuse me. So on U, It's undisputed independent sensors. It's undisputed that each is respectively and independently controlled to expose the same imaging target. And it's undisputed that each is separately controlled with a different exposure time. I'm going to skip ahead to slide 38. So
Council, just before you
Yes.
leave slide 35, just from a circuit standpoint, it looks like the processor would deliver via circuit 332 different control times, different aperture times, whatever it is, the integration times to the separate control circuits via 332. Is that correct?
that's how we would understand it, Your Honor.
Perfect. Thank you.
So on slide 38, each sensor has on-sensor exposure time control. You'll see the sensors here are 302, 304, 306, and 8. Each sensor also has its own control circuit. Those are the control circuits that Your Honor was referring to as coupled via 332, the signal from 332, that each control the exposure time based on the intensity image in its associated channel. So in this image scene, if there was an awful lot of red and less green, the red would have greater intensity, and therefore there'd be the possibility of that image becoming saturated, and the integration time would be dialed back for the red as compared to the green. So different times.
So can you speak to when you're doing this, and maybe this overarches on the last one, and I think one of patent owners' points is talking about that control during, and I know during's in the other claim. I think one of their points is that this integration is dynamic, I guess is what they want to say, instead of setting an integration time beforehand, and that's all it is, it can't change, and whatever comes out, versus while you open the shutter, you can adjust that integration time so that, as you pointed out just there, and that's what triggered me on it, is the fact that, okay, this image, wow, this has a lot more red, so I'm going to know to reduce my shutter time, my integration time for that red circuit. Can you just touch on that, please?
Yeah, I think you parsed that exactly correctly, Your Honor. In U, because the intensity of the components is varied, the feedback loop in U is to ratchet down the amount of time for a channel which is saturated. They describe a histogram process identifying if there's an awful lot of the image that is in the high end of the coding space, and therefore we don't have a large dynamic range that's in an absolute sense being represented, and therefore dialing it back to make a better use of that dynamic range. That's exactly what U does in the spectral components, and in what Matsushima does in the field of view components. So,
Thank you.
yes, Your Honor. So, I'm going to reach a stopping point and sit down and then be responding, but I do want to just make the perhaps final point, subject to what you want to talk about, that we have demonstrated on this record that U teaches all of this. We also demonstrate to the extent that IV disputes that the control of exposure time performed on sensor, which is what U teaches, that to the extent that they dispute that that is integration time, or that as control of integration time, we have demonstrated through the Miyazaki reference that a person of skill in the art would look to Miyazaki and find the on-chip electronic shutter control absolutely describes and is expressed in the reference in terms of charge accumulation times and all the other things that are characteristic of integration time, and therefore the combination as well. U has it entirely, but U and Miyazaki has it sort of belt and suspenders. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pause, subject to any questions, or reserve my time.
It doesn't look like there's any additional questions. Thank you, counsel.
Thank you, Your Honors. Your Honor, how much time do we get?
You've used about 10 minutes into your point.
Just bear with me for 1 second, Your Honors.
While you're setting up, counsel, will you confirm that you wanted 15 minutes for rebuttal?
Yes, but my intuition is I'm probably not going to use my entire case in chief time, but yes.
Thank you. I just wanted to confirm that I had it correct.
Yep. I'm ready to proceed whenever you are, Your Honors.
Go ahead, counsel, when you're ready.
Your Honors, we just had a conversation about what integration time meant. Petitioner seems to suggest that there's a difference between the district court meaning of integration time and what IV's position is of integration time. We do not see there being a difference. The position that IV is taking in this proceeding is that there's an express definition in the patent. If I can direct Your Honors to the patent itself, in column 4, line 3, it's highlighted in pink on the screen right now. The amount of integrated photo charge is directly related to the time the image sensor collects and integrates signal from the scene. If you look at our briefing, that's exactly the language we use. And the reason why integration time in the context of the patent is important is the patent explains why integration time is important, because it is different than exposure time. If we look at the patent itself, continuing on column 4, approximately line 37, which is highlighted in green.
Are you referring to your slides, or are you just referring to the patent?
I'm referring to the patent specifically, Your Honor, because there was this discussion about our claim construction being inconsistent, and I'm referencing the patent specifically to show how our position in the IPR proceeding throughout our briefing is consistent with what's in the patent. So I'm presenting the patent.
Counsel, I'm not sure my colleagues can see the green highlighting. Could you give them the column and
Yes,
line
absolutely.
numbers?
Absolutely, yes.
So start at the beginning. That's the first one, and then this one.
Yes, Your Honor. The first citation was on the patent itself, which is EX1001. It is appearing on column 4, line 3, and I read up to line 6. So it said the amount of integrated photo charge is directly related to the time the image sensor collects and integrates signal from the scene. That also appears in our slides. It appears in our patent owner response. It appears in our SIR reply. That is what we maintain integration time is, because that's what the patent says it means. Where this becomes important, related to our discussion today and the references that petitioner was just speaking to, is if we go further down in column 4, starting at line 37, we start to introduce the term exposure. And we explain how exposure is different than integration time. Specifically, it says exposure is the total amount of light allowed to fall on a sensor during the process of taking a photograph. Exposure control is a control of the total amount of light incident on a sensor during the processing of taking a photograph. But here's where it becomes important, Your Honors. In contrast to exposure control, which is used in conventional digital cameras to manage dynamic range, the digital camera systems of an embodiment use integration time control to control the electrical signal is integrated on a charge storage device capacitance within a sensor pixel as described herein. Your Honors, we were just talking about the U reference and Council.
Hold on, before we jump there, this seems to be very important. And
I completely agree, Your Honor. Yes.
Okay, you're going to something else, and it would be helpful. Is there a figure you can kind of walk me through? If you want me to really understand this, walk me through a figure so that I fully appreciate the distinction you're making between exposure, integration time, and then take that figure and show me on their figures how this difference is illustrated.
Unfortunately, Your Honor, we do not have a figure that illustrates that. Our expert explains in his deposition. I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, it doesn't have to fully. I just want you to point to me to structures or things that they may be relying upon, and you say, well, no, that's exposure. When they're talking, when they point to this and talk about time relevant to this, they're not talking about integration time. They're talking about exposure, and that's a red herring. That's something different. You understand? I mean, I need you to bring this a little bit more concrete and to light, because
absolutely.
It's a very difficult concept to understand the complete difference between integration time, which has to do with the shutter speed and stuff, and exposure time, which also seems to have something to do with shutter or how much light you're letting in and not.
Yes, Your Honor. I believe figure 1, which is from our patent, is helpful for this discussion. It shows a common digital camera. Just to walk through what's shown in a common digital camera, light enters through an aperture which is labeled as 150. The light then passes through a series of lenses. I believe that's identified as 110. Then passes through a filter, 112, and then ultimately comes in contact with a CCD sensor. Your Honors, exposure is the control of the light being incident on the CCD. So it is everything that I just walked through in the camera, from the light entering through the aperture, so that could be the physical mechanical shutter that closes, through the lenses, up until the light impacts the CCD, and then we get to integration time. So integration time is after the light is incident on the CCD. It relates to how do we read those values off? How long do we leave the window open? There was a discussion of integration requiring a temporal component. Is how long do we leave our window open to say, okay, we collected a photon. How many photons did we collect in this time period? So to make it as
so let me make sure. Let me just baby steps for me, because I want to make sure I understand this. Exposure. So 150 may have a mechanical shutter, right?
Yes, Your Honor.
And so a person clicks it, that shutter opens for whatever period of time it's been adjusted to. All that light that rushes in, that's exposure.
Yes, Your Honor.
Integration time, you're saying, is, well, however time they let it in, let's just, for my round number, and I know this isn't realistic, let's just say 10 seconds. You have that the sensor back on the plate 116. Now that sensor may choose to say, well, I'm only going to have integration time of 2 seconds out of that 10. Or I may have all 10 seconds, or I may have 7, I may have 2, whatever, for each of the, whatever number of sensors, each one's going to decide exactly how much of that exposure it's going to let accumulate.
I agree 100%, Your Honor. I would just make one minor correction. The integration time could be 20 in your hypothetical.
It could be even after the shutter closes.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. All right.
So let me, why, I'm a little confused as to why we're talking about exposure. Is it in the claim or something?
No, Your Honor. It's highly relevant related to the U reference that speaks of automatic exposure control, which is opposing counsel was standing up here saying it teaches every element, and U does not speak in any way, shape, or form related to integration control. It talks about exposure control, and those two things are not synonymous.
Okay, let me. So not only are they not, from what you just discussed with Judge Laney, it seems that they're essentially, I mean, they're related because they may work together in certain cameras. But actually, let me ask this: Do do all digital cameras have to have an exposure, an aperture that controls? I'm assuming an aperture is what controls exposure time. At least I'm using it that way. So do all digital cameras have that?
Your Honor, I'm not prepared to speak to all digital cameras, but I will say that most digital cameras will. That aperture control can be implemented a couple of different ways. It can be implemented electronically or mechanically. But I believe the majority of cameras, digital cameras, will have some sort of an aperture control. There are, but I really don't know the complete spectrum to answer that question, Your Honor. I apologize.
Okay, but what I take away from your discussion with Judge Laney is that basically these are different variables. How long that sensor is turned on is different than how long the exposure or the shutter speed or shutter time, whatever we want to call it, right?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, Your Honor. And if you look at our expert declaration on that matter, Dr. Saber explains that in considerable detail. Yes.
Thank you. Thanks.
So now I would like to actually go to our slides, directing the board to slide 2 that has the claim language. And there's 3 independent claims that are at issue in this case. Claim 1 says control and integration time of each sensor. Claim 9 has different language. Claim 9 says determine an integration time of each channel, of the plurality of channels. And claim 15 says identify an integration time for each of the plurality of channels. Your Honors, based on what petitioner is offering, specifically of claims 9 and 15, those elements would be rendered superfluous. Because, Your Honors, if there was only one integration time, why would you determine it for each channel of the plurality of channels? Similarly,
Say that statement one more time.
yes, Your Honor. If there was only one integration time for the system, why does the claim language say determine an integration time of each channel of the plurality of channels? Under petitioner's construction or understanding, application of the references, I think, would be a better way to characterize it. You would just say determine an integration time, because there is only one integration time. But that isn't.
But I thought petitioner's argument was that there are not just one integration time. That's what I was trying to, I mean, he seemed to be very clear that in the sample we talked about, you have the one independent sensor that's looking at that's focused on a bigger picture that includes the sun, is going to have a different integration time than the other independent sensor that's focused on just the individual.
Absolutely.
So they're saying there are multiple integration times.
Absolutely, Your Honor. And I believe counsel was slightly mistaken with what he was quoting from Matsushima, specifically as it relates to paragraph 23 and going into 24. Counsel said here that the reference teaches that there's an independent control of each of the sensors in paragraph 23. Why don't I actually pull that up so we can look through what it actually says. Give me 1 second to go to that slide, please.
Can you tell us the slide number as well?
I'm going to be going to Matsushima directly.
Oh. Which
So exhibit 1007.
Yes, Your Honor. I plan to go to exhibit. There we go. So if we go to paragraph 23 of Matsushima, which I apologize it's not showing on the screen. Give me 1 second to move it to the screen.
That's right. I can't see your screen anymore.
Oh, then
no,
I'll just read it.
I have it. We can pull it up. We can pull it up.
That's fine.
Yeah, we changed the panel.
That's perfectly fine. The subject image formed on the light, I'm reading paragraph 23 of exhibit 107. The subject image formed on the light sensor receiving surface of CCD 18A, 18B, via the respective imaging optics are subjected to the signal charge conversion by each sensor in the CCD that corresponds to an amount of incident light. The accumulated signal charges are retrieved from the CCD drive pulses applied by the CCD drive circuits and are sequentially output from CCD 18A and 18B. so let me scroll to the top, as a voltage signal, analog signal image corresponding to each charge. Your Honor, it doesn't say anything about where those signals are controlled by or how they are controlled. Where we get that answer is if we move on to paragraph 34. And if we read from paragraph 34 of Matsushima, starting at the top, it says for AE control, so automatic exposure control, the subject luminance image EV value is determined based on integration of the RGB signals in a single frame by the integration circuits 60A and B. And the aperture value and the shutter speeds are determined based on the EV value. This EV value. Then we continue reading. The aperture 17A and 17B are driven via the drive circuit 52A and 52B. The CCD A and B charge accumulation time is controlled using an electronic shutter to reach the determined shutter speed. The determined shutter speed, Your Honor, there is only one determined shutter speed for both sensors. It doesn't say a respective shutter speed, which is what I believe petitioner would like it to say. It doesn't say that.
It doesn't say that it's not either, though.
Well, Your Honor, it's very clear when it is making respective signals and respective components to identify them as A and B. It doesn't do that here, Your Honor. And we have a repetition of the same language in paragraph 35, which says the final aperture value and the shutter speed for imaging is then determined based on the EV. The aperture 17A and B are then driven.
Are you saying the EV would be the same for each one?
I'm saying the determined shutter speed, which is what they are applying in the parlance of Matsushima.
But hold on real quick. But the petitioner's point, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, and petitioner can get up and correct me, but I thought the key part of that is the fact that it says the subject luminance is determined based on the integration of the signals, right? So we're looking at the luminance, and that is going to be a factor in determining the value, the shutter speed, right?
So for clarity here, Your Honor, in Matsushima, we have a slightly different usage of the word shutter speed, perhaps because of its translation, but we have to use it consistent to what it says. It says, in other words, the CCDs have a so-called electronic shutter function that controls the accumulation times shutter speed of the charge accumulated by each sensor. So yes, Your Honor. Each sensor, we do not dispute, has the capability of adjusting its accumulation time. The dispute, fundamentally, Your Honor, is what value is that set to? Judge Laney, you had asked opposing counsel to crystallize the issue for you, and I cannot distill it and crystallize it any more clearly than this. IV's position is that a value needs to be determined for each sensor independent. You need to have a value for the integration time determined for channel 1, channel 2, channel A, channel B. Doesn't really matter what you call it. There has to be a value and an analysis and a signal that is sent to control that particular integration time of that sensor independently. And that independence.
So you're saying so you're saying the integration time has to be independently determined.
Yes, Your Honor, and I believe that's specifically what.
So let's go back to your slide 2.
Yep.
So let's start with claim 1.
Yes, Your Honor.
It says configured to control an integration time of each sensor, right?
Mm-hmm.
And integration time, normal parlance, is simply one or more integration time. So it can cover one or it can cover multiple integration times. It doesn't say look, we've got, in the context of this claim, we have a plurality of optics, plurality of sensors. We were all about the structure being a plurality. But then when we talk a processing component configured to control it's saying and integration time. That could be one integration time, could be two integration times, 3. I don't understand where you're getting that it has to be more than one integration time.
Your Honor, specifically the word each. If you look at
for each sensor, you have, yes, I agree with you. Each sensor is going to have an integration time. I don't see you really disputing that the prior art discloses that each sensor gets an integration time. I understand what your dispute, as you just crystallized, is that each sensor doesn't have an integration time that's specifically determined for that sensor. Yes, it gets an integration time. It's just not one that's been determined specifically for that sensor, is patent owner's argument.
That is your argument, Your Honor, which is specifically distilled, specifically when we get into the dependent claims, where we specifically recite that those integration times have to be different. But as it relates to in Claim 1, if we were to take the construction that only one integration time were to meet the claim limitation, there would be no reason for the additional words of each sensor to appear in the claim. There would be no reason for those words to appear.
Why do you say that? Because each sensor is indicating the fact, as I think we said in our previous institution decision, is indicating that that processor has to be able to control each sensor independently.
Correct, Your Honor.
So, okay, and in controlling that independently doesn't mean that each one has to have, in order to have independent control, does not necessarily mean that each one has to have a different integration time. A case in point, let's just say a hypothetical. You have a situation where the conditions are such that even if, let's take hypothetically your situation where you have a integration time that's being separately evaluated for each sensor, separately and independently, and it just so happens that integration time is the exact same number. So 2 seconds. What you're suggesting to me is the fact that each one has 2 seconds, that it wouldn't be covered by this, because that integration time is the same for each one. But that's not really what you're saying. What you're saying is that each integration time, regardless of what that time is, has to be a separately, independently determined time.
Yes, Your Honor, that is the patent owner's position. Otherwise, the claim for Claim 1 would read control and integration time of the plurality of sensors. It says each sensor. Specifically, if we look to then Claim 9 or Claim 15, let's talk about Claim 15, identifying an integration time for each of the plurality of sensors. Your Honor, I would say that why would you determine values for each of the plurality of channels if you didn't want to determine them independently? The word each has to have some meaning, because if we were to strike out the word each from claim,
well, I think what I think each does is it says, yes, you have to provide a time to each one. In other words, you can't have a single, if we look at the figure, so looking at, go back to Exhibit 107, where are the figures? Here we go. So if we go back to, I hate the Japanese one. It's that all right, so I'm on Exhibit 107, page 10, which is the petitioner figure 1.
yes, Your Honor.
So what I understand the claim work to be doing and having the independent control is you have 60A and 60B instead of just having 60 period, and 60 being used for all the separate sensors. And I think that's what petitioner's argument is. Why do you have 60A and 60B if they're not independent or they're not controlled independently? If you just needed 1/6, why wouldn't you just have 60 that gets splintered off to both? I mean, if all it's doing is saying this is the amount of time it's used to control the accumulation time, why do you have 2? That's 1 for each sensor.
Your Honor, that actually lends itself to a very easy technical explanation. There is no there's no requirement in Matsushima. Actually, it's almost inherent in Matsushima that the CCDs are of different sizes. You have a wide angle lens, you have a telephoto lens. The whole point of Matsushima is to stitch the two together. It seems very reasonable that you would have CCDs of different sizes. You cannot use the same CCD controller for CCDs of different sizes. So it's very reasonable that you could have CCD A controlling an 800 by 800 array and CCD B being a 400 by 400 array.
But doesn't that also, your response to that seems to lend itself that, yeah, then you would have separate independent controls of the integration time because they're different. The different sizes, they're different.
Well,
So why wouldn't you just control them separately and independently?
Well, Your Honor, because the timing element is the critical element there, is that they would be set to integrate over the same value, which is the reason why Matsushima's entire existence is to limit the boundary between the telephoto lens and the wide angle lens. And I believe we provide considerable documentation and examples of why that was a well-known problem in our briefing, that on that boundary, if you have dramatically different exposure values or integration times, you, well, we'll just call it, I'm sorry, I meant to say exposure times, you get a absolutely awful looking picture, and then you would have to do additional things to it. The issue here, Your Honor, is that when you have the same integration time, it simplifies everything that is downstream of it. Dr. Saber speaks considerably about how having the integration times being the same is actually desirable for a lot of reasons. And I think the fact that there are a different control circuitry for the two CCDs in Matsushima is a bit of a red herring because they're just two different sensors. And I think the intent of Matsushima was to use off-the-shelf components to synthesize this product. That doesn't get
Yeah, but that still tends to lend itself to having independent integrating circuits that are independent, have their own information, their own stuff. Now, again, I understand that's where I get this is, so that time, we're not really focused on time. The time can be the same for both. If in fact the way they're determined, I'm just talking under your argument, you don't really care what the time is. What you care about is the fact that each one is separately, independently from its own independent values, determines its own integration time.
That is patent owner's position, yes. As it relates to the apparatus claim, the apparatus needs to have that capability, yes, Your Honor. As it relates to the method claims, specifically 9 and 11, where our position is that they're expressly there, that you have to determine those values. Yes, Your Honor.
And I think at one level, I don't think petitioner really is fighting you that hard on that. I think they're fighting you on the fact that the evidence shows by the structure, by the different variables, that a skilled artisan reading this specification of 1007 would recognize you have separate independent integration circuits, 60A and 60B. And through the configuration, through the different conditions, would recognize that you provide separate integration times.
Well, Your Honor, Dr. Saber comes to the exact opposite conclusion. I'll direct you to his declaration of paragraph 121, which we highlight on slide 11. We do not think that is what a person of ordinary skill in the art would.
What exhibit number? I'm sorry.
That was 2017. It's demonstrative slide 11. Specifically, we quote that section in the SIR reply on pages 15 through 16. But the general point here, Your Honor, is that what Matsushima actually says in the text is that the CCD A and B is controlled using electronic shutter to reach the determined shutter speed. They have the same value. They always have the same value. They can't take a different value because they're—
Tell me the strongest, other than the fact that you say the determined shutter speed, why does that necessarily mean the same value, always the same value? You're getting all that from the fact that it says the determined shutter speed when you just identified two separate independent structures? I mean, that's what I'm getting confused. The sentence says in full, the aperture 17A, 17B are driven via the drive circuits 52A and 52B and the CCD 18A and CCD 18B. Charge accumulation time is controlled using an electric shutter to reach the determined shutter speed. Why is it that the determined shutter speed is one single shutter speed versus perhaps different shutter speed, but one for the A and one for B?
Well, Your Honor, I believe
Why isn't that a proper understanding?
paragraph 35 provides the answer to your question. Paragraph
Okay.
35, reading in the middle, it says the final aperture value and shutter speed for imaging is then determined based on the imaging EV. The apertures 17A and 17B are then driven to a final aperture value when the release button is fully pressed, and the charge accumulation is controlled by the electronic shutters at the determined speed. Your Honors, there is only a recitation of the final aperture values, the charge accumulation time, the imaging EV. That is the way that Matsushima works. It determines one value.
So, counsel, why do you need two separate circuits? Because I was looking at that circuit diagram. It looks like two separate circuits to me, despite the fact that there's a timing issue, but that's always going to be an issue when you have multiple sensors. So they're separate circuits. Why wouldn't they provide separate aperture values and shutter speeds?
Because the reference says that it provides it based to reach the determined shutter speed. The reference teaches what it says on the page. A petitioner has been very clear that they're not making an inherency argument. And even if they were making an inherency argument, inherency would require it must necessarily be there. And Your Honors, it's not necessarily there. It's not explicitly there. Could it possibly?
But it says the final aperture value and shutter speed for imaging is then determined based on the imaging EV. So that goes back to the illumination, the illuminance, right?
Yes, Your Honor.
The imaging EV value is related to the subject luminance, right?
Agreed.
Okay. And then it shows, as petitioner points out, one of the sensors is focused on a completely different, or not completely different, that's not fair, on a different focal point than the other sensor. Right?
Yes, Your Honor. That's the
You
way
would agree with that?
that's the way
Okay.
Matsushima works.
And
yes.
so do you agree with petitioner, those two sensors would have different luminances?
They would have different amounts of light energy hitting their sensors. Yes, Your Honor.
So why isn't the natural thing that flows is that a skilled artisan would have a different integration time for the sensor that has a different illumination than the other sensor?
Because of the difficulty.
Different subject illuminance than the other one.
Well, because Your Honor, the reference doesn't speak to it specifically, and a person of ordinary skill in the art, as Dr. Saber explains, would understand that by changing the integration times, it makes it much harder to stitch the images back together again.
But the reference doesn't speak to what you're saying either specifically either, right? I mean, you haven't pointed, you're trying to make inference from the fact that it says the final aperture value and shutter speed. And you're saying because it says the value and shutter speed, that it's got to be one. It's only one, is what you're telling. I mean, or at least you're saying that should be extremely compelling evidence for us, and that we should not find for petitioner because the evidence is so compelling that it's just one and there's no determination made. Whereas petitioner comes in and they point out we've got separate circuits, we've got everything about these sensors are separate, distinct, and independent. They have to have a CPU that sends a signal, that one signal for A, one signal for B. They're controlled. They even have different subject luminances because they're focused on different things. They derive from that, a skilled artisan would then recognize that they have different integration times. You're saying, well, no, they're wrong because it says the final aperture value and shutter speed. And I guess what I need from you is, Do you have more that supports the fact that the final aperture value and shutter speed is only 1? I mean, what else in this specification tells you we're only going to use one value, one shutter speed for everything and determine it not based on an independent basis?
So, Your Honor, I need to just address one issue. As patent owner, it is not our burden to prove anything. It is their burden.
No, but I've just made it clear to you that the petitioners come forward with some pretty good evidence. Now the burden shifts. You never have the burden of persuasion, but you definitely get shifted the burden of production. And right now I'm asking you for a burden of production. So
Yes.
what production do you have that overcomes their production
Yes, Your Honor.
of evidence?
Yes, I would direct you to the abstract of Matsushima specifically, when it's identifying what the problem is in Matsushima. So this is on page 1 of Exhibit 1007. It says, problem, to provide a digital camera that can prevent unnatural regions even when a telephoto captured image is combined in a center of a wide-angled captured image, and that can obtain images at various magnifications using a simple configuration. The hypothetical configuration that petitioner is putting forth with different integration times is not a simple configuration. As Dr. Saber explains, the simple configuration is to use the same integration time. There is no evidence in the record that supports why, how, where in Matsushima it inherently or expressly discloses the values being different. And that is fundamentally what is in the dependent claims. That it is not in dispute that the dependent claims require the values to be different.
Well, wait, I thought that is in dispute. I mean, I don't think the values, I think you and I just talked about that. The values themselves don't have to be different. Maybe the dependent claims have different values, right?
That's what I said, Your Honor. I was directing you to
I missed the dependent.
Yeah, I said
Okay.
dependent
Yeah.
claims
Okay.
11 and 16. Put a
Yes.
finer point on that. And to your point, yes, I agree with you. In the case of system claim 9 and method claim 16, we are determining the values or identifying the values of those integration times. And then when we get into the dependent claims, we're specifically stating what those values are. So to the extent that we are broadcasting a single value to all of the CCDs, and Your Honors are of the belief that that meets the claim limitation, they're then going to have the same integration time and therefore not meet the limitations of dependent claim 11 and 16 specifically.
Well, I mean, just so you're clear, I mean, I'm pressing because I think these are close issues. I'm just trying to help you flesh it out for me. I don't know exactly. I don't know where I come down on it yet.
Absolutely, that's why we're here, Your Honor. These are not easy.
Yeah.
These are not easy issues. These truly are not. Since we're on slide 3, I'd just like to talk about the meaning of dependent claim 2, since we're here, during a frame. And during your discussion with petitioner's counsel, there was a bit of a discussion about this claim sort of tangentially. Specifically, I want to make this very clear on what IV means by during a frame. The integration time needs to be changed while the image is being acquired. That's what during a frame means. In the parlance of the patent, it's a rolling shutter, meaning that as you are reading the data off, you are also changing the integration time. Petitioner has taken the position that during a frame just means you set it and then you use that value, which would effectively take the meaning of the word during a frame and make it meaningless. If you just say during a frame is some period of time while you're acquiring the picture, you wouldn't need during a frame.
Counsel, is that explained in the specification?
Yes, Your Honor. Rolling shutter is named expressly by name. I don't have the citation in front of me this second, but if you search the Exhibit 1001 for rolling, it comes up. I could do that for you right now. Makes your life easier.
Oh, just how about you reply? or when you get back up.
We can,
That's absolutely fine. I can provide that citation. I apologize for not having it at the tip of my tongue. But I really think that figure 7, as we're talking about what our invention is really important. And we have the language select an integration time. I'm looking at slide 4, which is a reproduction of figure 7. Select an integration time for each sensor camera channel from a range of integration times. Then we have integrate photo signals from each camera channel to form a single frame of data and correct, combine, determine. The determine
So
step.
what,
Yes.
I'm sorry.
I was just going to talk about the determine step at the end, which is 710, which says determine integration time control settings that provide optimum dynamic range on subsequent frames of data using information of the resulting image. So we have that idea that these values need to be determined. They're not preset.
Yeah, can you help me better understand how the prior art, is there anything more you have from their references that establishes that this determination is not being made? Because the problem, again, as I understand petitioner's argument, is they believe they've set forth sufficient facts and evidence showing that this integration time is determined. You heard the exchange with petitioner, we talked about that one example where it was red, and as soon as it determines it's too much red, it knows to adjust it. And so I'm just saying that their position is that they do have sufficient evidence.
Well, Your Honor,
I would like, I'm sorry.
I was just going to clarify one thing. The red, green, blue distinction is the U reference, which we haven't had a chance to chat about.
No, I understand. But they dovetailed it to this too. We talked. I mean, both of them. He talked about the fact that we are making a determination. It is being evaluated to establish integration time. I just would like you to speak a little bit more about what the facts and the evidence, other than just those two. I mean, is all you have those two paragraphs and relying on the value, the speed? Is there anything more that you can offer or show that the reference does not provide separate integration times for each of the sensors, or determine a separate integration time for each of the sensors?
Yes, Your Honor. I believe you're conflating two of their independent grounds. There is not a proposed combination of Matsushima and U. As it relates to—
No, I understand that. I understand that.
As it relates to U, specifically, U does not speak in any shape or form about integration control. It talks about exposure control. It has, they rely upon an additional reference, sorry. Let me just pull up the name because I'm struggling on the word. My apologies. Give me 1 second. Miyazaki. Thank you. Miyazaki, to combine those references, I just went to slide 18 there to trigger my brain on how to pronounce the reference. U does not teach integration control at all. Instead, they rely upon this additional reference, Miyazaki, that is a complete red herring, where it takes sequential images in small amounts of time after each other and picks the one that looks the best. It's a single system where you have a single sensor, and then in the case of this ground, with the combination with U doesn't have any integration control at all. They are combining Miyazaki with it, and Miyazaki uses mechanical shutter and a digital shutter as sort of a coarse and fine refinement, and wants to graft all of this structure into U, where U just doesn't have it there. It's just that there's no reason you would add all of this extra hardware, all of this everything to add to U, where U just doesn't have that concept of integration control. As it relates to the reference we were originally talking about, the Matsushima, I apologize that the names are very similar, is, I believe, Your Honors, the strongest explanation I can provide is in our briefing, and specifically when we rely upon Dr. Saber's testimony. And Dr. Saber explains in great detail how Matsushima works. And Matsushima—
And I appreciate that. I mean, he explains how it works, but again, he's also relying on he's explained the way it works based on his interpretation or reading it like you've read it, right? He's not being pushed, and maybe he did during cross-examination. And I just don't, if that's all you have, I mean, I don't think you're contending that it doesn't structurally have all the components of the independent claims. Structurally, all the components are there. You agree, right?
I think that's a reasonable position, yes, Your Honor. We're not disputing
Okay.
that. But the critical element here and the critical distinction, as we've been talking now for about a half an hour, is on the determination of those values. And quite
There's no dispute that it determines an integration time, right? Not necessarily for each of the plurality of channels or sensors, but it determines an integration time.
yes, Your Honor, that is fundamentally what I said when I stood up here at the very beginning of my time, and I said I'm going to crystallize this issue for you. That is fundamentally the issue that we are talking about with regard to the independent claims.
So the only fundamental issue is that there's not an integration time that's determined for each of the sensors.
As it relates to the independent claims, absolutely. As we had that further discussion regarding dependent claim 2, the during a frame limitation, which is not addressed anywhere. And specifically when we go into the dependent claims, where there's the specific recitation that the integration times be different. That's where our conversation really is just still what I was.
Where do you get the different from, though? That's, I mean, of the dependent claims, I'm sorry. Yes.
Yeah, the dependent claims, relatively shorter or less.
I can't see what you're pointing to.
I apologize. On slide 3, we're referencing dependent claim 11, is relatively shorter, is less than. So a first integration sensor is less than the second integration sensor, or at least one channel is relatively shorter than the integration time. The values in all of the references are the same. And you doesn't.
What do you think the weakness of their argument, let's say hypothetically, what do you think the weakness of their argument is, a skilled in the artisan, the fact that these are going to have different luminosity, I forget the exact wording, luminance exposure, or what's the word? It's in one of these things. The fact that each of the sensor is going to have different lighting that will affect that has an impact on integration time. Therefore, a skilled artisan would know to have a different integration time for each of the sensors. What is your bet? What do you think is the weakness in that argument?
As we started our conversation with, as it relates to exposure versus integration time, and how exposure relates to the light that is incident, so the light coming in, the control of things like lenses, filters, the Mango aperture, those can address the differences in those lighting conditions. And that's what Matsushima explains to us. The integration time, though, is a completely independent value. That relates to the readout. That is what happens after the photons are incident on the CCD. So to answer your question as concretely as I can, Your Honor, is that in the reference, in the Matsushima reference, we have a teaching to address the concern out of counsel that the lighting is different. Yeah, the way a person of ordinary skill would appreciate that you fix the lighting being different is you change the aperture. You put a filter in there. You make sure that there's a little bit less light that is hitting the CCD sensor. It does not necessarily flow then that you would change the integration time. The integration time is how you read the data. And reading the data off at different rates is really hard. And that is what Dr. Saber says.
Okay.
And just touching on the U reference just briefly, to reinforce, U does not even discuss integration time. It discusses exposure. And those are just not the same things.
Counsel, can I just interrupt? I just want to let you know that you're going into your time that you wanted to reserve.
I was actually going to conclude with that unless you had any further questions.
Are there any additional questions?
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Honors.
Thank you very much.
All right, Your Honors. Going to try to hit a few points here, and then I'm at your disposal for, go ahead, Your Honor, for follow-up questions.
Oh, I just cleared my throat, sorry.
Are we ready?
Yes.
Okay. So I think IV's counsel tried to set up a false distinction for you between exposure and integration time. The references don't speak in terms of exposure or exposure control. They speak of controlling exposure time on a sensor. So just put that aside for a second. Now let me help you out with the general concepts of exposure and apertures and shutter speeds and things of that sort. We have dealt with this in our record, and I would point you to the background section of Exhibit 1003 that's cited in the petition and throughout this record. But in particular, beginning with paragraph 41 and Exhibit 1003, Your Honor. Beginning with paragraph 41, we have a detailed discussion and an explainer for you on exposure. So exposure is a multi-dimensional concept for controlling the amount of signal that gets registered on a sensor or on a film image. The items that opposing counsel was referring to in their background section were distinguishing that world from film sensors to the digital sensors, CCDs, I think was in play, but also CMOS in this day and age of digital cameras. So in the world of exposure, one has control of the size of the opening, that's the aperture. One has control of the amount of time during which photons impinge on a piece of film or arrive at an electronic sensor. And one also has the sensitivity of the underlying medium. If it's film, it would be its ISO, if you're a photographer. If it's a image sensor, a semiconductor image sensor, it will be its amplification of the charges that are accumulated. That's what exposure is. And so they send you down a false journey of saying that because the word exposure appears in our discussion of you, that it's of that world. Okay. The words in and the disclosure of you are about on sensor, digital sensor, control of exposure time. So that is on the semiconductor. How are you controlling the accumulation time of charge? That is integration time, and that's the point that we made, that you alone.
Are you saying can you not control the accumulation of time through exposure?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Can you control the accumulation time simply using exposure?
Generally, there is no control of exposure in one chunk. One controls either the size of the opening, so the flux arriving, or the time that flux arrives, which is a time. So I think you jumped from exposure to exposure time, which I think is helpful for you.
Okay, I'm saying, can you use exposure to control the accumulation time?
One can use exposure time to control the amount of time that charge is integrated. Yes, and that's what,
Okay.
For example, that's what
But you understand the invention, that's not what the invention's about, right? The invention would be about controlling the accumulation time separate and apart from exposure.
Okay, so that's, maybe can I direct you to the record, Your Honors? So if we go to,
Sure.
1003, I'm going to direct you to page 24 and paragraph 42. This is the background description for you of what exposure is. Full stop. Exposure, not exposure time, not aperture control, not control of exposure. exposure, which is the false errand that they are trying to distinguish for. This has nothing to do with what our references are about. This has to do with the false dichotomy that they're trying to create. Exposure is controlled by varying apertures, by varying time, and by varying sensitivity. That is what they are distinguishing when they're talking about mere exposure control versus integration time. But when one controls the time on the sensor, that is integration time. It is not varying exposure. It is not varying ISO. So when we look to you and we look to the digital image sensor world that you is versus the exposure, aperture, and ISO world that they are trying to set up as a straw man for you, our reference U absolutely teaches on sensor control of exposure time, which is control of integration time. So that's point number one. This entire section provides great detail for you as background to be able to understand those concepts and to be able to distinguish between sort of a talismanic word that they want to throw out as exposure being one thing and integration time being another. They're not. On sensor control of exposure time at an electronic shutter in the semiconductor chip is control of integration time. So that's one point I want to make. Second, I think Your Honor.
Just put a fine tune, just make sure I understand.
Yes, Your Honor.
I'm going to say it in the simplest way I understand. Your character, you're saying patent owner is confusing the issue because while exposure in one sense can just be the light that comes in through a traditional kind of lens, when you refers to exposure, it's talking about the actual light that's being received by the sensor.
What I'm saying is that IV is trying to mislead you into thinking that U is speaking to exposure. It is not. It is speaking to control on chip, on sensor of exposure time. Exposure time control is something much more specific than exposure, which can be affected by any one of a number of things. So they're arguing against a straw man. We're not making an exposure argument. We're making a on sensor control of exposure time argument based on the disclosure of U. And we're additionally making a accumulation of charge in photo wells argument with respect to Miyazaki. All of those are unambiguously control of integration time. So when you hear them say exposure, ask them, is that on sensor exposure time control, or are you just speaking to exposure in the broad? And the portion of the background technology teaching of the declaration is very instructive on this. This is all well understood by persons in the art. They're trying to exploit a word that appears in a compound construct and pretend that the compound construct is merely the single word. So that's.
All right, I want to shift to, if we could you shift to the discussion we had about determining for each sensor separate, like its own integration time?
Yes, let me.
There's a merit to the fact that each one you have to determine, you have to evaluate and decide for each of the sensors its own integration time, regardless if that value is the same or different.
Yep.
Just for the independent, I understand dependent claims require them to be different, but you have to be evaluating. Well, and let's separate claim 2 as far as during. We'll get to that. But just the integration time, you have to find an integration time for each of the sensors.
So let me point you to, as a backdrop for this session, let me point you to slide 20. Here we place the limitation adjacent to the teaching of Mitsushima, and we're referring here to paragraph 24. So in each case, there is control of accumulation time by each sensor. Now, patent owner would like to make an awful lot out of each. We agree that each is important. It is not talismanic in terms of what it conveys to them. It appears also expressly in the disclosure of Mitsushima. So Mitsushima talks about controlling the accumulation time of charge accumulated by each sensor. The parallels in the
Right, but I think what patent owner's problem with 20, slide 20, when I read it, so the slide 20, the part from Matsushima you put on there, just for the record, is the CCD 18 have a so-called electronic shutter function that controls the accumulation time, shutter speed of the charge accumulated by each sensor via the shutter gates pulses. Okay, that's all fine and good. That controls the shutter time, but it doesn't tell you that it's got a controller that's determining or establishing for each sensor its own accumulation time.
Yeah, okay. And that was the discussion that we had earlier quite exhaustively about the role of the separate control circuits through separate integration circuits through to separate control circuits for each sensor and eventually into the integration time.
And I'd like to dive into that a little bit more because it seems like your argument is that, hey, what skill in the art if skill in the art sees the different images it's taking of, the construction of this thing, the skill in the art, their background is going to establish that I'm going to create and determine separate independent accumulation times for each of these sensors, is how I understand in a broad stroke your argument.
Yes, I think that is correct.
What evidence do you have that establishes or strengthens your support that is in fact the background knowledge a skilled artisan would have? Because if we just look at the specification of Matsushima, I'm not saying you don't have, I mean, I think there's some good points there, but it's that gap. It's why would one skill in the art know that I'm going to make a determination and determine for each sensor its own accumulation time versus having a set accumulation time that's applied to each of the sensors?
Yeah, certainly, Honor. So first at the outset, paragraph 134 that we've duplicated on slide 26 is evidence of exactly that. It lays out that for you. That's the discussion that we went through that I think was somewhat helpful in terms of framing the issues during when we sat earlier. But that is itself evidence. Now, when I'm going to do something that the other side didn't. We've been discussing the actual teachings of the reference. We've referred to the diagrams. The other side simply talks to you about what they think they mean. I'd like to go to their slide where they speak to 34 and 24 and 35, and I will commend to you also paragraph 23 of Mitsushima. But the argument to the contrary, I think we've articulated very clearly where we get the interpretation of different integration times coming from different subject luminances in the different legs of the control circuit. But their argument seeks to identify a word that is used in its singular form in a sentence. And we read those sentences as speaking to what each control loop, each sensor is doing. They read it as what both must do. Let's have a single one. We read those sentences as, with respect to the channel A, that charge accumulation time is controlled using an electronic shutter to reach the determined shutter speed. That's describing for one of them what's done. It's also describing what's done for the other. There's a reason that the disclosure here in Mitsushima talks about that being applicable to each image sensor, just like the claim says each image sensor. That alignment is stark. Now, I will
So
also
take that,
Yeah, go ahead.
I want to apply what you just said, but I don't know. So if you take, I think you're on patent owner's slide. So go to slide 10.
Okay, I was
And
on.
they have the actual,
Fair enough. I'm on
And
slide
they
10.
have actual text from 34. And it says the apertures 17A and 17B are driven via drive circuits 52A and 52B, and the CCD 18A and CCD 18B charge accumulation time. So your point is when it says the 18A, 18B charge accumulation time, it's saying each one has its own charge accumulation time.
Yeah, let me, if we can just move to slide 11, which also provides that paragraph, but provides a fuller version of the paragraph, and it's actually not reshuffled. It's actually the image from the spec here. I'd like to point out a couple things. One, we've been discussing how we know that each leg of this circuit, each sensor channel is doing its own thing. One, the sentence that they cut out on slide 10 is the final one. It says, as a result, optimal exposure adjustment and focusing are performed. So to your points that we've been discussing, a skilled artisan would not understand it to be optimal to determine the subject luminance of each channel and ignore it and institute a single integration time for both legs of the circuit. So the word optimal that they cut out of the previous slide is important. I'd go to the previous sentence as well. There's an awful lot of...
Finish that point. Let me make sure I understand what you're saying. When it says optimal exposure adjustment,
Yep,
and focusing,
I think the focusing is a different concept, but in terms of exposure, we'd expect aperture. Go ahead.
But even on focusing, each of the sensor configurations are going to have an exposure adjustment and its own focusing, right? Or
They
no?
are. They are, Your Honor.
Okay. And is that your point?
Counsel, can I,
Point
hey,
there? I'm sorry.
I just want to have a follow-up question to Judge Laney's line of questioning here. This is a little bit off topic, but if I take a conventional SLR camera with one lens, and I take a wide angle photo, and I use the automatic exposure functions to set the EV, the exposure value for a wide angle lens, and I take a picture of the same thing, just like in your one slide, and then I change it, and I take a close-up. I take I'm going to also use I'm going to set a new EV. I'm going to ask that camera for a new EV value. I think you usually do that by putting the shutter or your actuation button down like a half step. And then that's going to set a second automatic exposure, or AE, as is talked about in Matsushima. And in doing that, isn't a conventional digital or even analog camera going to set different automatic exposure times for the same scene if you're changing the focal length and everything? So, and does that speak to your point of having the optimalness be different exposure times?
I think it does. Now, you're talking about doing one and then doing another. Matsushima very clearly describes the structure to do both at the same time. But
Totally agree.
But your reasoning
Totally
is correct in terms of, yes, different conditions. And, I made the point with different subject luminances because, the sun is very bright, and when it's in one and not in the other, that's pretty stark, right? But you're right. You reasoned about it from a succession of usages of a single camera, but Matsushima is about integrating that in a single camera with two imaging channels, which are independently. Yes.
I agree. What I was thinking of was I am certainly not a person of ordinary skill in the art, nor am I trying to tell you I am, but in thinking about how optics and cameras work, having grown up down the street from Kodak Park, I think that a person of ordinary skill in the art would probably know that you have different automatic exposures, in particular in digital cameras, for different focal lengths and different angles. So that's why I get your optimal argument here.
Yes. I think my time is expiring. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. If I can just.
I'd like to give you a little bit additional minute because I do want you to address whatever it is. I'll give you time to see what you're going to hit, but also the during argument on claim 2. Did patent owner correctly characterize you to say that it doesn't have to be during, it can be before as long as it occurs during? As I understood the argument.
No, he did not, and he further did not accurately characterize the record. IV has never made the rolling shutter argument in this proceeding. So on twofold, that's incorrect. The one thing I did want to resonate with on Kodak, I've tried to commend to you the full background disclosure discussion. That was prepared by our expert, Michael Gwydash, who spent 25 years at Kodak doing image sensor products. So you mentioned Kodak Park. I'm happy to answer, if you'll entertain me any longer, I'm happy to answer any further questions, but I don't want to wear out my welcome.
Okay, I'm just on that claim 2. Petitioner doesn't disagree that the control of the integration time has to be during the accumulation that is for the image frame. I think this kind of goes into what we talked about before. We have this term where it says claim 2 reads, the device of claim 1 wherein the processing component is further configured to control the integration time of each sensor during a frame. At the very, very beginning, we talked about, I guess I look at it as a frame would be a still image. But even when you're getting that frame, there's going to be amount of time at which you're allowing in the information to create that frame. And you would agree that you're controlling that integration time while you're gathering the information in order to generate the frame. You understand? I mean, so having heard what I said, tell me where I'm garbling or it's confusing or that you understand and you agree or you disagree.
I think I understand and agree. The claim 2 has a additional term during a frame. We have construed that and described what that means. I think you're getting to the question of does stuff happen during that period? And we have laid that out in detail. I can point you in our deck, just, again, pictures are worth 1,000 words. I will jump you quickly to, it's a backup slide 69. This shows what happens in a digital sensor during the integration time. The gates are opened and closed to reset the sensor and to gate out the charges that are accumulated. Yes, control occurs during a frame.
Okay. I have no further questions. Thank you very much for answering this.
Thank you, counsel.
Someone who's very popular on Teams.
Don't think it's me.
May I proceed, Your Honors?
Go ahead. Thank you, counsel.
Petitioner just stood up here and said that we're effectively taking the board on a wild goose chase related to exposure control. That I stood up here and tried to make a false equivalence related to chemical cameras and digital cameras. However, what I did when I stood up here before is read specifically from the specification. And the specification expressly discusses exposure control in digital cameras. Quoting from the specification, at column 4,
Exhibit.
column 4, line 41. In contrast,
Exhibit.
Which
Of exhibit.
exhibit?
of the patent, exhibit 1001. In contrast to exposure control, which is used by conventional digital cameras to manage dynamic range, the digital camera systems of an embodiment use integration time control to control the time electrical signals is integrated on a charge storage device capacitance within a sensor pixel as described herein. Then the specification goes on further to define what integration control is. Integration time control, also referred to as focal plane shutter control, controls the time the electrical signal is integrated or accumulated by controlling a switch, e.g. charge integration switch, coupled or connected to the sensor or a photo detection mechanism of a sensor. For example, the charge integration switch is placed in a state to allow the charge to accumulate within the sensor for a period of time approximately equal to the integration time corresponding to that sensor. Upon completion of the integration period, the switch is placed to a state transfer charge as a photo signal. But then we have a very important sentence, Your Honor. Digital camera components or circuitry are configured to allow independent control of the charge integration switch associated with each sensor, thereby making possible dynamic range control of each sensor. Your Honor, this is what the patent actually says. The inventors are clearly putting the invention in the context of conventional exposure controls of digital cameras. That is.
Can you show us specifically what you does and how it's different? I mean, just
Which reference, Your Honor? I didn't hear the beginning of your question.
you. I think you're out.
Yes.
Just go to you, how you's different.
Yes. In the case of you, what you does is you looks at a histogram that is being generated based on a black and white sensor and sees how much energy is hitting that sensor and then makes adjustments to the exposure of the incident to the red, green, and blue channels, effectively changing the aperture, changing filters, changing other things. It says absolutely nothing about the integration control. It talks about traditional conventional exposure control mechanisms that the patent expressly puts in the context of what we're not doing. We are not doing conventional exposure control in digital cameras. That's what the sentence expressly says. Now, I also want to return to the.
Okay, so just could you point me to the best column or line number that illustrates this in you? But what I understand you to be saying the difference is that in the patent, we have our sensor and we're able to, I guess for lack of a better way, shut off when the sensor is going to accumulate any more energy or any more of the light that's coming through the exposure, if you will. I hate to use the word exposure, but you have the sensor, you can kind of shut off the sensor or when you're ready to stop it from taking in any more information. Whereas you're saying in you, there is nothing like that involved. Is that fair?
That's a fair characterization, Your Honor. Let me direct you to column 10 of U at appearing at roughly line 18. What sets, and this is describing the U reference, so this is exhibit 1005. What sets the present invention fundamentally apart from existing technologies is the use of the black and white intensity image from the image sensor with a full transparent filter or no filter at all. The BW image sensor can capture full information, including details that may be missed by those of the other image sensors. The intensity image from the BW sensor is then repeatedly used in the image processing in the DSP chip and subsequently produces a higher quality film like digital image. So, Your Honor, what that's saying is we're going to use this black and white sensor, use the measurements on that, and use the information from that to change our red, green, blue channels. It's a big leap. It's a big gap. It's a big optimization problem to say, well, we can change values and we're now going to change a very specific value, the integration time. It's just not there. It doesn't mention the charge. It just mentions that it has a charge coupled device. And as we've had a pretty lengthy conversation about throughout the proceeding, is that the exposure is not the same thing as integration time. The patent makes it very clear that conventional exposure control in digital cameras is not what is being claimed here. What is being claimed—
Do you think U has anything, what's the closest thing U has to an integration time?
Hey, counsel, hey, Judge Laney, I've got a more direct question that goes right along with that. Can I ask it?
Yes, please.
I was just reading the top of column 10, the first full sentence, and it talks about controlling independently each of the image sensors. It says, in particular, that sentence says that why this is different from existing digital cameras is because each of, and I'm reading the very last two lines, 4 and 5, while each of the image sensors in the present invention can be controlled independently. That sounds awful similar.
Your Honor, could you direct me to where you were reading? I apologize.
Top of column 10, first full sentence in U.
It can be appreciated those go in the art existing cameras use one image sensor would not be selectively control the operations of image pixel, while each of the image sensors in the present invention can be controlled independently. Is that the sentence you're
Yep. Yes.
I think that's fundamentally very different, Your Honor. Is that we again have a issue of a genus species issue here, is that, yeah, there are things that can be controlled. It doesn't say what those things are. And it was petitioner's burden to put forth that issue of that they were controlling the integration control. And petitioner even admits in their grounds here that U does not teach integration control. And that's why they bring in the additional reference. And as we make very clear in our papers, there is no reason why a person of ordinary skill in the art would take U and combine it as they've applied to this multi-image sense system where you take these rapid images in succession. There's no reason why a person of ordinary skill in the art at the time of invention looking to solve the same problem that we were looking at in our invention here, which is how do we improve upon the resolution beyond a conventional exposure control, would have made that combination. So to answer your question as completely as possible, Your Honor, petitioner even admits that it's not there in U in the section you just had me read on the top of column 10, because it's just not there.
Wait, integration isn't there? The word integration is what you're saying.
Yes, Your Honor. The integration control, as we were talking about, that is the control of the focal plane.
But isn't integration shown in Matsushima?
Yes, Your Honor, but that is not a ground before us. The ground before us is this reference, the U reference, in combination with Miyazaki, and the other reference—
Oh, Miyazaki, sorry. Yep, no, I gotcha. Yep.
Oh, okay, I apologize. Your Honor, yes. Miyazaki teaches a system by which you can control the integration time. That is yes. The issue there, Your Honor, is why on earth would a person of ordinary skill in the art combine these things when they have nothing to do with each other, and they have nothing to do with the problem being solved by our invention, which is specifically that we are overcoming the limitations of conventional exposure control systems.
Well, what about the fact that, so let's go to that column 10 that Judge Deanna just pointed out. Let's see if we can come to at least agreement what it does say. It says, while each image sensors in the present invention can be controlled independently. So let's just start with the obvious. It is teaching having independently controlled sensors, right?
Yes, Your Honor, that is what it says.
Okay. And if we take the secondary reference, Miyazaki, it teaches that in this in the context of capturing images, integration time is one of the things for a sensor that you would want to control. I mean, what is your understanding of why Miyazaki discusses integration time in the context of Miyazaki? Why do they have integration time?
Yeah, because the way Miyazaki is working is it's working on taking large number of images in rapid succession and seeing which one of the parameters that we've tweaked looks the best. So yeah, you can tweak parameters to make an image look better or worse. That's not in dispute.
What does the integration time purpose does it serve in Miyazaki?
I'm sorry, there was a beep. There was a Teams beep over you. I didn't hear your question, Your Honor. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Could you repeat the question?
What is the function of the integration time in Miyazaki? What would a skilled artisan understand the function of the integration time in Miyazaki to be serving?
I believe it would be the same integration time that is used in all digital cameras, Your Honor, is every digital camera that exists has to have an integration time, yes. So the usage in Miyazaki is yes. It has a digital camera. It uses multiple layers of shuttering, a mechanical shutter, and then uses a finer shutter to play around, dynamically change how the image is going to work when they're getting that successive mosaic of images. That's what Miyazaki is doing.
Okay. So you just said that everything has integration time. Integration time is something that is extremely well known to skilled artisans when it comes to this field of endeavor.
That's not in dispute in this case, Your Honor. What is in dispute is do the
So
reference.
then why wouldn't a skilled artisan, in view of you describing image sensors that are independently controlled, why wouldn't they automatically be led to have independent control of integration time when that's something you're saying is in everything? It's ubiquitous.
Your Honor, as best I understood your question, every camera does need to have an integration time. What you is referencing, and Miyazaki is not referencing, is how do you have multiple sensors in the same camera? Miyazaki has nothing to do with that particular problem. And that is specifically the problem that we're dealing with in the case of the patent that we're here to talk about. On an obviousness.
Yeah, but you just, so if I look at individually, I have one camera with one sensor, I'm going to have an integration time for it, right?
Yes, Your Honor.
And that was well known to skilled artisans, right?
I believe so, yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Well, now each one of your plurality of sensors is basically a plurality of individual little cameras. Because each one has the shutter, has all the components. So that it's a series of individual cameras. And if you have independently control of all these independent cameras, why isn't integration time necessarily going to be one of the things that you're going to independently control?
Your Honor, I believe we have to look at what the claim says, is the claim doesn't have just a two independent cameras that you have one centralized controlling structure. And in your hypothetical, there is no centralized
Okay.
controlling structure.
But I'm not, right now, I'm trying to understand what a skilled artisan would understand. And he's not gonna look at the camera and say that. I mean, I'm positing for you that a skilled artisan would look at each one of the plurality of sensors as being basically its own individual camera. And as such, a skilled artisan would understand, if I'm going to treat this as its own individual camera, yeah, I'm going to have some magic in the back end that's going to bring it all together to form one frame or one scene. But in the meantime, when I'm gathering the data, each one of these is treated as an individual camera. And as part of that, integration time is going to be a factor I need to consider for each camera.
Your Honor, the best I can say to your hypothetical is that that is not the grounds before us today. And the magic behind the curtain that you spoke to is critically what the patent is about, is how you get that higher resolution by doing the magic behind the curtain. Because the conventional systems, like we're being talking about today, only allowed you to control the exposure and not the integration time, because the magic behind the curtain gets much, much harder when you start playing around with the integration time instead of playing around with the exposure time parameters like the aperture. I see I'm at time.
Okay, but your claims don't require any coordination between the plurality of sensors, however. Your claims simply require you to have a plurality of sensors and a controller that can independently control them. It doesn't require any coordination between them. They're broader than that, aren't they?
Well, Your Honor, I would direct you to Claim 9 that says a processing component coupled to the plurality of channels, where the processing component is configured to determine an integration time of each of the plurality of channels. In your hypothetical, that processing component would be the individual or the person, or there wouldn't be a processing component because the two cameras merely just existed.
Okay.
I would also.
I really appreciate.
Can I put one point on that, because I think Claim 15 also highlights the point. Is generating an image by combining the captured image by the plurality of the sensors. In your hypothetical, it doesn't address that very element that is the whole purpose of why we're doing this, which is to generate that higher resolution image by combining the two things at using the two different exposure times.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, counsel.
Thank you.
All right, counsel for both parties, thank you for your presentations today. We will be adjourned and we'll go off the record. We're going to take a short 10-minute break and we will start the next proceeding for the